Hey everybody, it's Ed. I've got two announcements before we get started. Number one is I want to thank Amy Winter for becoming our newest Patreon supporter. Patreon is monthly support that comes with a lot of pretty cool benefits. If you want to learn more about monthly support through Patreon or other ways to support the podcast, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Second thing is a really cool trip that I just announced. If you follow me on social media, you may have seen it. But I have teamed up with the Free Flow Institute for a 5-day float on the Green River in Utah through Gates of Lodore and Dinosaur National Monument. And this is a storytelling course, and we're going to be focused on the power of a good story to affect change. So during our 5 days on the river, we're going to examine the region's rich history. We're going to talk about past and present conservation challenges of the region, and then we're going to learn how effective storytelling can be a powerful tool for protecting our beloved wild places. Over the course of my career, which has now been about 2 decades in land and water and conservation in the West, I've found, and this is just me, but I've found that success can be found not by harping on doom and gloom, but by focusing on solutions, common ground, and win-win scenarios. And I really, really do believe that optimistic, easily accessible storytelling can have a measurable impact for good. So whether your audience is a publisher or a foundation or a donor, board of directors, a landowner, a live audience, a podcast listener, whoever, your ability to transform complex issues into captivating stories is a critical skill for affecting change. So in this workshop/river trip, I'm going to share some of the strategies that I've developed over the years that's allowed me to do everything from crafting multi-million-dollar grant proposals to boiling down complexities of water right issues into a compelling narrative that makes sense for somebody who can possibly fund your project. And then to conducting interviews like I do on this podcast about potentially controversial issues and talking about things in a way or asking questions in a way so that people want to listen. I don't really know how I ended up in this situation doing these types of podcasts and this kind of storytelling work. If things went according to plan, I'd be a stockbroker at Merrill Lynch, but here I am. And so I am excited to try to share some of these lessons that I've learned with other storytellers on this really, really cool river trip. If you want to learn more about this trip, there is a link in the profile, or you can go to freeflowinstitute.com and you can look for my course. There's a lot of other great courses on there as well with a lot of past podcast guests. For example, Chris Latreille, who I've had on the podcast, Brendan Leonard, who I've had on the podcast, and they're going to be adding more. So I would love to see some of you for a few days on the river. It's September 1st through 7th of 2023. It should be a great time. I'm really excited for it. Check out the link in my profile if you want to learn more. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Megan Torgerson. Megan is a podcaster and the creator of Reframing Rural, a narrative podcast whose mission is to, quote, share stories of people and places in rural America in an effort to celebrate culture, preserve history, and cultivate curiosity and conversation across geographic, class, and cultural divides. In just 3 seasons, Megan has grown Reframing Rural from a spark of an idea into a highly regarded podcast, one that's been recognized by institutions such as the Headwaters Foundation, Montana Farmers Union, Humanities Montana, and more. Personally, I've learned a ton from Megan's work, so it was an honor to have her join me on the podcast. Megan was born and raised on the Great Plains of eastern Montana, primarily in the small town of Dagmar. She attended University of Montana in Missoula and eventually made her way to graduate school in Seattle, where she earned her MFA. As you'll hear in this conversation, during her time in grad school, Megan began exploring the idea of a podcast that focused on rural America. Rather than getting bogged down in endless planning and idea generation, she took action, produced season 1, and put it out into the world in spring of 2020. Fast forward to today, and Megan has a team that works with her. She continues to receive wide-ranging recognition, and the show is being broadcast on several Montana radio stations. I've known Megan for a year or so, but this was the first time I've had the chance to ask her detailed questions about her journey as a storyteller. We started out talking about her upbringing in Dagmar, as well as her educational background and early career. We talk about why she decided to create a narrative podcast, and she explains the very involved process of creating a single episode. We discuss some of the issues that she explores on her podcast, including rural gentrification, which is the topic of one of her most recent episodes. We talk about her generosity in the podcast space, whether or not she considers herself a journalist, why she is so optimistic about the future of rural America, some advice for aspiring podcasters, and she has lots of amazing book recommendations. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to subscribe to Reframing Rural on your favorite podcast app. Megan is committed and she's a real pro, and I know that Mountain and Prairie listeners will enjoy the amazing work that she's putting out into the world. Hope you enjoy. Megan, I'm so excited to chat with you. I'm glad you're willing to chat with me because I feel like you're like a real pro and you know how all this audio equipment works and you know how to edit and you make like a real product, whereas I just kind of like run my mouth and ask people questions. So I've got a lot to learn from you. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And I was thinking about the best way to start this conversation. And sometimes for some reason, I never want to just ask people like, all right, well, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? But with you, I feel like that's such an important part of your story and of your work. And it kind of laid this foundation that has become your career. So could you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
Of course. And thank you so much for having me on, Ed. Your podcast is one of the first podcasts that I started binge listening to when I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, and really missing the West. So it's exciting to be among the many inspiring people who you've interviewed. I'm so grateful for the chance to be on.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time. I hope you listening to my podcast didn't set you back a few years.
I don't know about that. So I grew up in Dagmar, Montana, and I'm always surprised when anyone has heard of where Dagmar is. I grew up on a farm and ranch actually about 10, 12 miles south of that unincorporated town of about 30 people who live there. And yeah, it just has a post office and then like a market kind of cafe that's open for very limited hours during the day. And it's in far northeast Montana, so about 50 miles from Canada and 5 miles from North Dakota. And my dad, he just retired from farming after the last harvest season, but he farmed in Montana and North Dakota because we're so close to North Dakota. And I was actually born in Williston, North Dakota, because that's where the closest hospital was.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever been out to that part of Montana?
I've been to more the southeastern part. Mm-hmm. When I was in the real estate business, I had some ranches that I listed kind of in southeastern Montana, and I loved it. I only went up a few times, but every time I did, it's such a cool place. And it's not what people think of. I think outsiders think of when they think of Montana, but I felt like there's almost, in a lot of ways, more character and kind of more of a richness to that landscape out there because it's still kind of like it probably was, 50, 70 years ago, I would guess, or you could tell me better. I mean, what was your childhood like? Like you've got sisters, I know, and I mean, just kind of normal childhood, school, sports, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of 4 girls, and my sisters are all quite a bit older than me, so I was the only one at home from like 6th grade on.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and it's interesting, like that part of Montana has largely probably stayed the same, but as agriculture has become more industrialized, the population has gone down a lot. So, for instance, when my grandpa, he was born in 1921, and when he was growing up, the population of Sheridan County would have been around 10,000. And then right now it's about 3,500, but I was just looking back, and between the years of 2000 and 2009, which is when I graduated high school, the population went down by like 20%, which is pretty substantial when your population sits only around 3,000 people. I went to school in Medicine Lake, which is about 18 miles west of my farm. And that school was like K through 12, 100 kids. And if you've listened to my podcast, you've heard me mention that I was the only girl in my junior high class for 3 years. It was me and 3 other boys. So that was kind of a difficult experience a little bit. But I loved like the ranching part of growing up where I grew up. So my dad farmed and ranched, which growing up a lot of farmers did. Now people are kind of siloing into one or the other, more kind of doing more just farming. So in comparison to like the northeast part of Montana and the southeast part. Southeast is kind of more ranching country, and where I grew up is like a lot of wheat farms and peas and canola, and kind of I've heard it's a little similar to southeast Saskatchewan, so we're kind of in that kind of growing region. Yeah, and I love the cattle, but the farming aspect was always like these big machines that I was always afraid of messing up. And so I just loved getting out with animals anytime I could. That was kind of where I felt most at home.
So by the time you were, say, 17, like into junior year of high school, and you have to start thinking about going to college or leaving, were you ready to get out of there? Were you like, oh man, I want to get in a bigger place around more people? Or did you always have kind of a fondness for that rural area of Montana?
Yeah, I think my fondness actually came after leaving that part of Montana. And I always kind of envisioned that I would leave because my oldest sisters did. Like when I was in high school, I think my sisters were living in, San Francisco and Boulder. And at one point, my oldest sister was working in Munich, Germany. And so I wanted to be like them and go to school in Missoula, and had always envisioned that for myself. And then when I was a junior in high school, I moved to Williston, North Dakota to finish out my last 3 years of high school because my parents really wanted a better experience for me. I was really into volleyball and basketball, and just, being on a basketball team with I think we had 6 people when I was a freshman in high school, and that can be really challenging.
You got to be in good shape. Wait, so did your parents move there with you? Like, you say you went there. I mean, did you live with a different family, or was it close enough to where you could go there and come home at night?
So my parents bought a condo, and my mom lived with me during the week, and then we would go back, to the farm on the weekends. Wow. And it's about a 50-mile drive between Williston and the farm. But yeah, it was great though. I loved, it was the first time I lived in a town ever, Yeah. And so I had a friend who lived on the same street as me, so I could actually walk to a friend's house. That was just crazy to me.
That is crazy to think about, because I'm from a small town, but in North Carolina, a small town is 10,000 people, And so when I moved out west, I remember I'd be driving around and you go through somewhere and it had a little population sign and it'd be 10 people. I was like, now that's a different version of small town. So you went to college in Missoula. At that point, when you showed up freshman year, what did you think you wanted to be? What did you think you wanted to study?
Ooh, well, I was going to be a vocal performance major.
Really?
Yeah.
You got pipes?
I do. I love to sing. That's my favorite thing. My first artistic interest since I was a little girl was singing. But the summer before my freshman year of college, I did not practice the song that I was supposed to sing in front of this board of, I think there were professors, and they would rank how you sang the song and then place you in your classes. And I was a first soprano when I was in high school, but that summer I was just having a lot of fun with my friends and not practicing my vocal range at all. And so I showed up and sang this song so horribly that I transitioned all of my classes out of music. And I don't know what I switched my major to at that point, but I bopped around from linguistics to communications to English is what I ultimately got a degree in. But I had no idea what I wanted to do pretty much the entire time that I was in college.
Were you a pretty good student? Did you, even when you were trying to figure out what you were going to focus on, did you do pretty well?
I was a good student at life. Snowboarding.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. And off-roading with my 4Runner. No, I'm so glad that I graduated from college. Yeah, it took me some time. I would say I became a better student when I studied abroad. So about my junior year of college, I went to Prague and studied at Charles University. And then I moved to Germany and I worked as an au pair. And I signed up for one writing class just to stay enrolled as a student at UM. And it was a virtual class.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of when my interest in writing started to flourish. So my grandparents were from Czechoslovakia, present-day Slovakia, and Germany. And so when I lived there, I got to meet a bunch of my family, and I was really like thinking about family and stories and place. And I think that's kind of like my early inclinations for wanting to write and storytell around my experience and my origins.
Yeah, and so that makes sense. And so once you kind of found this thing that grabbed you and you were super interested in, did you find it easier to work extremely hard on it? Because like for me in school, in high school, I was a really, really, really good student. And then in college, I kind of just messed around. And then similar to you, I did a semester with the National Outdoor Leadership School. But then when I came back, I was a machine and I made really, really good grades. But before I don't know what it was, but nothing really grabbed me. And so was it a lot easier for you to work harder once you found something you liked? And the reason I asked that is because I can't imagine how hard you've worked on this podcast. And, and so you've obviously got the capacity to work extremely hard, but do you have to be kind of obsessed with something to do that?
Yeah, I think so. And that obsession really started in like the desire and pull to work really hard started after grad school, I think. Because after graduating from UM and then moving around a bit, I had some jobs where I like applied my writing skills, but I wasn't like super passionate about maybe what I was writing for as much, or it just wasn't. I don't know. I remember just having some job experiences where I never felt like I was giving my full skill sets or I was like being my full self. And then in grad school, when I started the podcast and then just like continued the work of Reframing Rural and like adjacent projects that have kind of come up since then, it's like, yeah, I need to pull myself away and I need to like remind myself that to have lunch, and I'm like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. I need to like get off of my computer, So I think that kind of thing came a little bit later after having work experiences where I didn't feel fulfilled.
Yeah. I remember when you and I talked initially, you said something to that effect about staying up real late working and editing. And that struck me because I do the same thing. And I remember, I don't know, just kind of recognize a like-minded person because, I talked to a ton of people, but I remember there were a few things you said and I was like, oh, I think she and I might be kind of on the same wavelength there. So I don't want to skip over too much, but you mentioned the podcast. Talk about, when did you decide, like, how did you decide to start this podcast? Like, two questions. Why did you decide to start a podcast, audio? Because you're obviously focused on writing. You're an excellent writer. But why audio? And then why, of every subject you could have picked, why rural?
Sure. So I guess to kind of get to that point, I'll back up a little bit. When I was living in North Carolina, I worked for a PR company, and I was really kind of missing being part of the arts, which is kind of where I worked in before. I worked at a documentary filmmaking nonprofit in Portland before that, and then in Missoula before I moved to Portland. I was like a blog writer and interviewed filmmakers and like went to Big Sky Doc Fest and hung out with filmmakers, and it was a lot of fun. And so I was kind of missing being in the arts. And so I started looking into grad school, and I also just like really missed the West, like all of my family and friends. And, it was so expensive to like fly from North Carolina to Montana. And
because you were in Asheville?
Yeah. I was in Asheville.
That's where, I think I told you, that's where I got married, in Asheville.
Oh, that's so cool. I love Asheville. Like, I feel like if my family lived out there that I would have maybe wanted to stay. Like, it is a really cool community, but it just felt far from the place that...
It is far.
Yeah.
It is far. It definitely is. I mean, it's far. We want to go there for a family vacation, but just getting there is such a pain. And so I get it.
It's far when you're like flying from the Asheville airport to the Missoula airport. It's like really expensive. So I wanted to go back to grad school, and then I found this arts leadership program at Seattle University, and this was at the same time as right after the 2016 election was happening. And I was hearing all these stories about rural in the news that did not resonate with who I thought I was or the communities that I was raised in or the people that I loved and knew. And so in my application letter, I wrote about doing something with rural and something with the arts. And I didn't exactly know what that would be. Like, I think I originally had in that letter talked about bringing arts programming into rural communities. But I later identified in grad school, like there's so much culture and like awesome things happening in rural places. So instead of like bringing the outside knowledge into the rural places, like how about uplift the things that I love about the rural place that I'm from? And after like moving away from Montana, I really discovered that actually where I grew up is really cool and interesting. And usually like when I lived in Missoula, I was kind of embarrassed a little bit to be from Eastern Montana. Like I feel like there's more of an emphasis on the beautiful Rocky Mountains and like people, that's kind of where the mystique of Montana comes from. And here I am from like the flat, boring part, or so I thought, And then after leaving, and going back home and visiting for harvest and just kind of getting curious about where I grew up again, made me realize that my upbringing is really unique, and that there's a lot of like really great ethics that were instilled in me growing up on a farm and ranch. And that's something to celebrate. And so, I started the podcast in grad school. And I guess to kind of like go back a little bit further, I didn't know that I would be doing an audio project until I took this class called Creating Podcasts That Matter through the Seattle University Theology Department.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought like, I like the On Being podcast. I like Mountain and Prairie. I like the Modern West. Like I'm going to take this class about podcasts and learn like how to make one. Maybe that'll be something I'm interested in doing. And, as a musician and a writer, I'm like, audio is interesting to me. And so then I took that class and I combined my interest in going back home and recording stories from my really small town into making a podcast called Reframing Rural. And reframing, it comes from like the first book that I read in grad school called Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Tuiwai Smith, who's a professor of Maori studies. And she talks about how Indigenous people are boxed into the narratives that other people have about them and the importance of Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories. And so I also took that as like, I'm a rural person who needs to tell rural stories, because if I'm hearing all these narratives about rural that don't resonate with me in the news, and I'm learning these tools, then I have a responsibility to do something about that.
So cool. I didn't know that whole backstory. I love it. That's why I do podcasts. I get to ask people all these questions. If I was just asking you these like on the phone, you'd be like, that guy's a real weirdo. but all right. So that all sounds great, but it's one thing to just call somebody up on Zoom or sit down with somebody, even with just your iPhone, and record a conversation. But you are producing these NPR quality style. I mean, they're audio documentaries. And so it's not, when a lot of times people ask me, I want to start a podcast. How do I like, just start talking, just record it, just record a conversation. But that's not at all what you're doing. Like you kind of went, I've been doing this thing for 7 years and I couldn't do like 10% of what you've done with all the audio stuff. I just don't, it's kind of like part journalism, part creativity, part audio engineering. It's almost like filmmaking in a way, but just with the audio, the way you mix it all together. And so what was that process like, deciding, all right, I'm going to make a highly produced podcast that's based on these conversations, and I'm trying to communicate pretty complicated topics. You just started doing it, I guess?
Well, the filmmaking comment is interesting because lately I've been thinking of myself as like, if I were a filmmaker, I would want to be a filmmaker who uses really long shots and like it doesn't use a lot of choppy editing and stuff, because I like to write and I like to give people the space and the breadth to go on for as long as they want to. And sometimes my interviews last like a really long time for that reason. But I don't know how I came up with the idea of like creating a narrative podcast compared to an interview style podcast. I think it might have just organically happened as I was chopping up the interview with Kim Redningen that became my first podcast. But I also had in mind when I went home in 2019 and recorded most of the interviews that made up the first season that I wanted to record sounds and just like identify the soundscapes of Eastern Montana. Like I remember recording my dad driving the semi into the yard and like going through the pasture with my cousin to check on the cows. And like there's this one really big bump in the pasture driving up the hill in the pickup, and like the sound of kind of the back wheel spinning out a little bit. And My mom frying a steak in a pan, and the sound of the rain on the Quonset, and those kinds of sounds. So I wanted it to be immersive, because I think that, a lot of people probably haven't been to a place like Dagmar. So in addition to hearing the voices of the people that I'm interviewing, I wanted them to have a sense of what that place sounds like. And then they can, insert the sense of smell, maybe if they're hearing a steak frying. And I also chose audio because I didn't want people to make like visual judgments of people if they have really dirty Carhartts, or I don't know, if they look like their face is weather worn because they work outside every day. So I wanted people to hear those stories without looking down on them if they were an urban person who might think less of people who work with their hands.
Yeah, that's smart. The way you put the sounds in, I was listening to the one yesterday with your dad, which I thought was such a powerful episode. And I think if people want to kind of sample too, I think the one with your dad, and I'll have links to it in the episode notes, but the one about farm secession in northeastern Montana, like I thought that was awesome one. And then the most recent one, as of this recording, rural gentrification. So I'll link to those. But there was a part where your dad was sweeping, and you could hear the sweeping, and I just was kind of in the story, and I wasn't paying attention, and then I kind of started thinking about it from a podcast production standpoint. And I was like, man, she had to record that and then edit it in, but it just works, and it allows you to kind of paint, because it was almost like I could see your dad doing that, see your dad sweeping. And it's really, really powerful when done correctly. But just the fact that you were able to figure it out and do it on your own. Like, all right, so when you started that first episode, or when you had the idea and you put out the first episode, did you think at that time, like, I want this to be my job? Or was it just like, I've got a cool story that I want to tell, and I think people need to hear this? Or maybe neither of those options?
Yeah, I thought, well, it was partially also at that time for my graduate credits. So I used, I used the interviews for the summary project that we had to do. And then I coded all the interviews and used that in my thesis as well. So it's kind of like, using it as an excuse of finishing grad school and also sharing the stories with a wider audience. And it's interesting how that all played out. So February of 2020, I quit my job. I worked at a nonprofit in Seattle called Business Impact Northwest. And they were talking to me about, after I graduated, becoming like the communications officer of that nonprofit. And I could just see, looking toward the future, being really discontent, just like doing, I don't know, like I said, working for other people. I would always kind of get bored. Like, okay, we went through the cycle of advertising that event or fundraising for this program, or so I could just kind of like see that happening. And so I quit that job, and then I took out as much student loans as I could. And then I'm like, I'm just going to like see where this podcast takes me. And then in like right before the pandemic hit too, I had a friend who was looking for a grant writer. And so I took her on as a client. And then the pandemic happened, and I finished out my last quarter of grad school and just kept producing the episodes. And then I also went home and worked at the farm for a month, because I'm like, well, I need some money, and I want to keep kind of doing this freelance stuff because this seems like it's working. And then it's cool because like slowly I've been able to work more and more on the podcast and let go of some of my clients. And I'm just so excited that it's grown in the direction that it has, and that I'm able to do something that keeps me fulfilled and that keeps my curiosity going, because I think that's what really drives this work, is having the excuse to ask people questions. I mean, just like, the work that you're doing, you're like, I'm curious about this subject or this person, so I'm going to ask to interview them. And that I get paid to do that is like really a dream come true.
I feel like with podcasts, it's so unique because it's generally long, and you can't, over time, like if you put out enough of these things, you cannot fake it. Like you can't fake the enthusiasm. I mean, you could act enthusiastic for, maybe even like 50 episodes or something, over time. But if you're doing it long enough, I think people can tell like whether or not the person that is doing the interviewing really cares or not. And I feel like just given your family's history and all of your experiences, and then that the finished product that you put out, it's very, very clear that this is something that's super, super important to you. I don't know. It's almost like podcasts. Just it cuts out. It's not like TV or something where there's all these different layers between the people that are participating and the end consumer. And with podcast, it's kind of going straight into your brain, and the listener can make up their mind pretty quickly one way or the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And one thing that I like about the type of storytelling that I'm doing is because I don't have a journalism background, and I don't have to stick to like the rules of trying to be an objective journalist. Like, I think part of the reason that both my guests and my listeners have like trust in the podcast is because I'm telling my story and I'm being vulnerable alongside the guest. And that's also just such a great outlet for me. Like doing the farm succession episode, like it was such an emotionally heavy thing to me, like this transition of my family away from our farm. And now my parents are living in Missoula most of the year. And so like in order to make sense of those emotions, I made a podcast episode about it. And like I have musician friends who say the same thing, like, oh, if I don't know how I'm feeling about something, I'll write a song to like make sense of it. And so I think maybe that's a little selfish of me to be like, oh, I want to process the succession of my farm, so I'm going to do a story about it. But I do think that it's something that a lot of people are going through, and that it is emotionally heavy, and that hopefully I make people feel less alone in that transition, even if they're not taking over the farm like my sisters or I are doing. So
no, I'm with you. I mean, I say it half joking with my stuff, but my podcast is a very selfish project because I want to learn. Like I want to learn from you. I'm asking you these questions because I want to know, and thankfully other people get value out of it. But at the end of the day, I want to know about this stuff you're doing. One other question, or two questions, but you mentioned right next on my bullet points was about journalism. Mm-hmm. And do you consider this to be a journalistic endeavor, or more of a creative endeavor, or kind of a mix? And then do you ever worry about taking sides on issues one way or the other? Because like your most recent episode, you approached it, it's pretty clear what everybody thinks about some of these antics of these scumbag real estate developers. Do you ever like have internal push and pull about maybe I should try to be biased on this particular issue, or maybe I shouldn't? I mean, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's something I've definitely mulled over a bit. Like I have been invited to interview some people who are campaigning to enter into politics, and I've said no to that because I don't want my listeners to think, oh, she votes a certain way, so I'm not going to listen, or now I'm going to listen more, or whatever. I don't really want politics to be a part of the conversation, because that's what I'm trying to do, is like push past politics, because the narrative on rural is overly politicized. But I think my latest episode, probably the last two, which are both on the subject of rural gentrification, have probably taken more of a stance, and the Dover story has become a little bit more journalistic. But I always shy away from that term, just because I feel like I don't have journalistic training, but I just am kind of following my curiosities. I do have training from grad school that's kind of like autoethnographic research. So I guess on the question of, do I think of this as a journalistic or kind of creative endeavor, that brings to mind one of my favorite filmmakers. Her name is Chloe Zhao, and she's produced a couple of films on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Songs My Brothers Taught Me and The Rider. And she uses, these are like fiction films, narrative films, and she uses non-actors, like people from those reservations, and uses the stories of their life to create a narrative film. And I'm not like making things up in my podcast, or, I'm not doing that kind of storytelling. Like I am a non-fiction artist, but I like how she's kind of blending genres in a way. And so, yeah, maybe in that way, I am kind of blending, like I am doing reporting, but I'm also doing like personal essays, and I'm also doing like reportage. And yeah, so I think I'm kind of in and out of like a variety of kind of genres. And I think that's what's really exciting about the podcast form and being able to distribute your own work, is that you have like the creative limits are boundless. You can kind of do what you want with certain episodes. And I think like with the Dover story during the pandemic, I lived in Missoula for about 4 months out of 2020. And I was really just seeing like the influx of wealthy out-of-state people kind of coming into Missoula and how that was shaping Missoula. And I had also heard from different podcast guests from like Bozeman of, our community is really changing and it's really hurting, and how much wealth is kind of coming into the state. And so I was just personally interested in reading Ryan's book. And I think you recommended the book to me, actually.
It's a great book.
It's so good. I highly recommend. And Billionaire Wilderness too. I haven't finished that book, but that's an incredible book from what I've read of it too. But yeah, so I felt like when I feel like a little stirring of inequality in me, I really like want to shine a light on that. And so just Ryan's personal story, the author of Pushed Out, and the book itself just really lended to me exploring that, because I was feeling all these things about how Montana is changing.
Can you just give a quick thumbnail sketch of that episode and kind of the main ideas of it? Because I encourage people to listen to it. It just came out. I actually finished it this morning, and it's so good. And I think I would recommend your episode, and I'd recommend reading that book because both were very enlightening for me. But can you just kind of give an overview of what that is, just to get people to go and download it so they can listen to it themselves?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the episode is largely centered on Ryan Pilgrim's book, Pushed Out: Contested Development and Rural Gentrification in the U.S. West, which uses Dover, Idaho as a case study for how rural gentrification harms community cohesion and the environment. And so Dover, Idaho is really close to Sandpoint in North Idaho. And so for the story, I went up there and I walked around Dover. So what happened, the story of Dover, it was a timber mill community from about the 1920s to about the 1980s. And then after the timber mill closed, like a lot of mills closed in that region, the land came up for sale. And so a developer bought it with the idea of building a high-end resort community on 285 acres right by the Pend Oreille River. And so it links up to the Lake Pend Oreille. It's like right there. So you can, the Dover Bluff that I talk about in the episode, you can see like both the lake and the river. So basically Ryan's research question was like, how did this once, working class, tight-knit community agree for a high-end development to be built on this land? So there's a lot of twists and turns. A bunch of infrastructure crises ended up happening because the mill didn't keep up the pipes. They had wooden pipes, and so they had to rebuild their water system at the same time because their sewer system wasn't kept up. They had to rebuild their sewer system, and so the town was basically forced to first incorporate so that they could apply for federal loans so that they could rebuild the sewer system and the water system. And the person who bought the land, who ended up building the resort on the land, only agreed to sell them the acres that the town needed to build the sewer system onto if they rezoned the property, the former timber mill site. So then it ended up getting rezoned from agricultural use to planned use development. And then now there's all these mega mansions there, and the class divides are very stark, and a bunch of people got priced out of the community. And the people who stayed, they're working jobs that don't really pay very much money. And the people who bought homes there are only there for a few months out of the year. And so I really wanted this to be like a warning call for different towns who might not have a plan. If a developer might want to come in and totally retool the vision of your community, it's important to have a plan in place. And then also for, potential people who come to towns like in North Idaho or in Montana who are like, oh, this is really great. I might want to own a second or third home here and only be here for a couple weeks or months out of the year, to really think about what does that purchase do to that community? It has real impacts. So
I thought it was, I loved that book, and I've got it actually on my desk, so I look at it all the time. And so when I heard that you were going to be chatting with her on your podcast, it was really, really good. And it gave me more of an idea in my mind of like the place kind of came alive a little bit more. I mean, obviously she does a great job in the book describing it, but something about hearing you there, talking with people and being able to hear like the construction sites in the background and all that stuff, it just made it all a little more real, and talking to, hearing the voices of some of the people that have been affected by it. So not that you need my approval, but you did a really,
Thank you.
You did a really great job on that. When you put one of these things out, do you worry about negative feedback, or like, do you get negative feedback? I'm going to talk about the positive stuff too. But do you ever get people ripping into you or trying to rip into you about something you did?
I've had a little bit of that. I think that I can't remember what episode this was in response to, or maybe I shared something on my social media page that might have been liberal leaning, and someone like commented, I thought that you were trying to be nonpartisan or something. This was kind of after one of my earlier episodes. And it's interesting because I feel like Reframing Rural has its identity. I have an identity, and sometimes I conflate the two. So I'm kind of like learning what things I want to share on maybe my personal pages or Reframing Rural's pages.
How do you handle it? Like, how do you handle that? Because the thing is, I don't mean this in a bad, like negative way. It's just the fact is like you're only going to get more of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Because as this thing grows and grows and grows, you're only going to get more of it. So like, how do you handle it?
I think in that instance, I didn't delete the comment because that was like something I remember learning from working in PR. Like, unless it's really bad, you kind of just leave it up so that they're not like, oh, and she took down my comment. And I don't know if I don't think I chose to address that. And more recently, someone commented on my farm succession episode and mentioned that I didn't highlight or they said, I don't think they had listened to the episode yet, but they were like, I hope she also highlights the indigenous people of that land and all of the work that they did to steward it. And that was an interesting conversation I had with my story editor of like, should I talk about the Assiniboine in this story? And she was like, well, this is like a really personal story that's really kind of rooted in the present. Like, I don't think you need to. And in retrospect, I didn't address that comment that person had, because in my mind, I'm like, I don't know, maybe you should listen to it before you comment about it. But maybe I should have commented on it. And I am like talking about indigenous issues in other episodes.
Yeah, the Dover one you go into great length on that. And I thought that added such a great dimension to the overall understanding of everything. I wasn't really expecting it. I was just and I thought that was a really great thing to focus on. That was a surprise to me, but made it all the more richer. Yeah, that was because Ryan did such a great job in her first or second chapter of that book of discussing the Kalispell history. And then Mike Lithgow from the Kalispell Natural Resource Department agreed to be on the podcast. And I think with that story in particular, it's so important to understand the history of extraction and genocide within that region. And so, yeah, I'm so glad that I got that interview to include in that episode. But I'm curious to hear how you deal with negative comments too, because I could definitely learn from that as I'm sure some more will pop up. You don't want to follow my advice, but the way I handle it, there are two movie quotes or movie scenes that instruct me. The first one is on Roadhouse. When this guy starts mouthing off to Dalton, says, "You don't look like much to me," and Dalton just looks at him and goes, "Opinions vary." And so I answer any smart mouth comments with "opinions vary, Dalton." And if it's an email, I link to the Dalton clip, the YouTube clip of him saying it, and that's all I do. And then the other is on Tombstone when Doc Holliday goes up to Billy Bob Thornton and like throws him out of the casino because he's a bully. And then Billy Bob Thornton comes out with a shotgun and like tries and acts like he's going to shoot him, and they just kind of laugh at him. and then they just have a conversation, and then Doc Holliday looks over at him and goes, "Oh, Johnny, I'm sorry, I forgot you were there." And I think that speaks to the power of just ignoring stuff. Personally, I just don't have the bandwidth or the temperament to try to kind of get into it over the computer with people. So it's either opinions vary or just straight up ignoring. And I don't suggest, you're more professional than me, so you probably don't want to follow those.
Well, so far I've been ignoring, but I like the opinions vary, and also love the reference to Tombstone, one of my favorite Western movies.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you were there. One thing that I've noticed about you, the internet just kind of allows you to see what people are doing in a very, very odd way. But I've noticed about you that you're very generous. And I feel like you're generous with your time and you're generous with your energy. And like, for example, I've noticed that you've partnered up with other, like done some cross promotional stuff with other podcasts that have overlap with what you're doing. Right now you're one of the folks in charge of the Rural Radio Collective. It's the collective?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like some people think, all right, there's the pie is this big and I want my piece. And if anybody else has any more, it takes away from my piece. Whereas I feel like you have this attitude of the pie is unlimitedly big. And so, and there's enough for everybody and you're just very generous. Have you always been like that? Or like, was that just a choice you made to try to help, bring all, the rising tides lifts all boats kind of thing? Or how did that come about? Because I've been very impressed with that.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you for recognizing that. I think that it probably starts with my parents. They're very generous. And, my dad worked incredibly hard to put us all through college. And my mom is also just like super generous in her time and, was always volunteering in the different communities. And even, my grandparents too. So I think it's just something that I was surrounded by. And I think growing up in a rural community, you like have to volunteer a lot or like wear a lot of different hats in order to, like have a fire department or a ladies' aid group or whatever it is. So I think it kind of came about that way. And then I think like I usually am always volunteering in some way. And like, so I stopped doing this last year because I just ran out of time, but I was like on the Sunset Hill Community Association board, which is my neighborhood community center in Ballard in Seattle where I live. And I've always tried to like give back in some way. And I think that was further instilled in me in my graduate program. Like Seattle University is a Jesuit school. And so one thing they really instilled in us is like, to whom much is given, much is expected. And you are gaining all of this knowledge. So you really need to go out into the world and apply it. And I've also just found that opportunities also kind of come around when you're putting yourself out there and helping out with different organizations, whether that's paid or volunteer. Like, because I also, I work with the Red Ants Pants Foundation and the Red Ants Pants Music Festival. And I also co-consult with my sister who has a PR firm. So I'm kind of have my fingers in a lot of different pies because I want to like help those people out and believe in the work that they're doing. And it also benefits me in some way too. So it's not totally selfless, but I have found that it ends up helping me out along the way as well.
Yeah, I think it definitely comes back around, but you got to be all in. And again, it's got to be authentic, and people can tell pretty quick if you're not authentic. When you think about rural America, what are some of the biggest opportunities, like the bright spots that you see? Because you've been in this, like, I feel like you've been really deep in this during such a pivotal time. Like when you went all in was when COVID started, and it's just that's been such a pivotal time for rural America. I mean, I think it's always had its ups and downs and some pretty intense moments, but I feel like the last 3 years have been super intense while you've had the vast majority of your attention focused on it. So what's giving you hope? Like what are you really optimistic about when you think about rural America?
I love that question. And I'm really excited to be doing this work at a time when, the narrative on rural America has kind of shifted from one of division and despair to one of more like hope and homecoming. And so I think a couple of things. Just even thinking about the people that I've interviewed, I think there's a lot of cool opportunities for rural artists in terms of like creative placemaking and reimagining what we can do with some of our vacant small town buildings, and how artists can inform like a people-centered process and put people at the center of like the vision that they want for their community, whether they're facing rural gentrification or whether they have a small dwindling population. I think rural places just really are great incubators for entrepreneurship. Like, you often do have to work multiple jobs or volunteer with multiple different organizations to see your vision forward. And I think that's a really important skill to have. And so yeah, I don't know, like thinking about reimagining rural that MSU Extension is doing is a program that's helping small Montana towns like envision the communities that they want, and also like how they can bring together newcomers and established residents and like bridge divides there. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening with regenerative agriculture. And like I just had a call with your podcast guest, Amber Smith, with Women in Ranching. And
she's so awesome.
Oh, yeah. She has so many like quips. Like, we were talking about my perfectionism, and she said, don't let perfectionism get in the way of good enough. And I like wrote that down.
No, she's extremely wise. Actually, when I was working in Eastern Montana that I mentioned, she was one of the people I met. I had lunch with her because we were working on the property, the Antelope Springs Ranch.
Oh, cool.
And so like I ended up with her and her husband and her kids. Like, so I met her probably, I guess it was like 2 years into the podcast. But anyway, yeah, she's awesome. I'm so glad y'all connected.
Yeah. I think there's just so many awesome women doing a lot of great work right now, like Amber and like Sarah Calhoun and the Girls Leadership Program. Like there's so many people that I look up to and so much hope that I have. Like it's great to look at newspaper headlines and like read the news, but then also be part of like really amazing initiatives happening. So it helps with my despair, my personal despair when I think about the world sometimes and I get, depressed about how things are. I also think about all these awesome things that are happening with people like Amber and Sarah and Tara Mastel with MSU Extension. I have to name drop her as well.
Yeah, there really are. That's been a similar thing with me is just talking to all these cool people. It's made me much more optimistic than I was, because the news can drive you nuts. And so another question about your podcast. I was talking with kind of a storyteller guy, conservation storyteller guy recently, and I feel like the work of storytellers is so important. The work you're doing to like. Another example, got Pete McBride that I've had on my podcast a few times, and he's telling the story of the Colorado River in a way that reaches audiences that wouldn't have any interest in delving into the minutia of water rights. But through filmmaking and photography, he's able to reach a broad audience. So, I mean, you may not even think about this, but how do you measure success as a storyteller? Because it is your business now, and it's your livelihood. And so, you got, I guess, one measure is paying the bills, but then beyond that, like how do you measure success as a purpose-driven storyteller, if at all?
Yeah, I think so far I've been measuring success as far as like how many people reach out to me and tell me that my work resonates with them in some way, or how many organizations reach out to me for me to repurpose the things that I've learned to help them. So like this fall, MSU Extension had me out to a leadership retreat, and I met with a bunch of extension agents and talked about how storytelling could be used in their communities, whether they're looking to highlight rural mental health services more or bridge divides between producers and consumers or what have you. So I kind of have been looking at it through those two lenses, but I was in a call yesterday with some people that the Headwaters Foundation out of Missoula brought together, and we're kind of planning a narrative change. We're going to change the name of that, but some sort of convening around narrative change. And we were talking about how we can measure like the impact of our work, whether that's storytelling or journalism. And that's something I really want to get better at. And I don't want to do that just because, funders ask that question of like, what's your impact? But I would be really curious to see like, how are these stories making a change on the ground? And I know that there's a lot of different forces that change policy and that change opinions, but it'd be cool to follow that thread like one step further and see how I changed someone's heart or mind, or how maybe it'd be amazing if someone heard the Dover episode and then like created a plan for their community so that a developer didn't do it for them. Yeah, so I'm curious as the years go on with the podcast to continue to measure that impact in a more granular way too.
And what other storytellers do you admire? It could be podcast people, it could be filmmakers, whatever. But people that you look at their work and you're like, man, that's really good stuff. I hope my work can have that sort of impact or be like that. Who comes to mind when you think about people you admire?
Ooh, that's a nice question. On Being with Krista Tippett is one of my original inspirations. I think she just does an amazing job of interviewing people, and she talked too about she put together this article about what she thinks about before she's interviewing, and she really wants to ask people questions that like get them excited and spark their curiosity, and not just like the interests that she has. So I try to do that, but it's it's hard. Like you said, we're often like kind of selfish in how we're asking our questions too. And Sarah Smarsh is a huge inspiration to me. She wrote the memoir Heartland and really talks about the importance of highlighting class. And she talks about the importance of having diverse newsrooms as well, and bringing people in from different class backgrounds. S.G. Goodman is a musician. I think she's from Kentucky. Yeah, she's really awesome, and she has this song about like basically I don't care what you think about how I talk, and like just stands up for country in a really cool way. Those are ones that come to mind for right now.
All right, here's a question that I'm sure you get all the time, and hopefully if you're overwhelmed with the question, then you can just direct people to this timestamp on our podcast. But say I'm a person who has a very passionate interest in a certain subject, and I want to start a podcast. So I send Megan an email, hey, I want to start a podcast. How do I do it? What should I do?
Okay.
What is your answer?
My answer is, I think the most important thing that you need to learn at first is like how to edit audio. Even if you're doing an interview podcast, you're probably going to want to chop up if someone says the F word accidentally, or if they say a bunch of times. You're going to need to learn how to do a little bit of editing.
Wait, you're not supposed to say a bunch of times? You're not like, or you know.
Oh man, it's so interesting editing audio because you hear people's speech patterns. And luckily in my podcast, I don't get to edit myself very much. It's more other people are talking more than I do, but I say, yeah, like an exorbitant amount of times. So you're
never more than I do. So never more than
you're going to have to get over not liking hearing your voice. It takes some time, but I'm sure are you over that, Ed, or?
No, and I had to hire somebody to edit because I can't listen to my voice. Thank you, Sam, for all your hard work, sir. But like I still can't stand it. It's excruciating, but it's not as bad as it used to be.
Yeah, it's gotten better for me too.
How important is equipment?
Not that important. I got a Tascam. That was like my first Tascam field recorder was like the first piece of audio equipment that I got. And then my husband bought me a new microphone that I record my narration into. It's a Shure microphone and it's very nice. But I didn't have that for the first few years. I think like for the first season, I had a group of questions that I kind of repurposed and asked every person. So I think that kind of having a thematic set of questions, if you're doing something that's like set in one town or one subject, could be helpful to kind of repurpose. And then, yeah, just knowing how to edit and record. Like I'm not a genius at doing field recordings, and I want to learn more from my story editor when I move back to Montana. But really, I don't know, just do it. Like, don't talk about it and just do it.
Yeah, I think that's wise across the board for whatever activity. Just go, action. Just so people have a full appreciation for how hard you work. I think we were talking about this before we hit record button, but this Dover episode that I hope folks will go and listen to, it's about an hour, almost exactly an hour. And how long did that take you to, I mean, if you paid attention from start to finish, how long did that take you to put together?
Yeah, that took me over 100 hours. So that doesn't count like the first read through of the book, but that counts, and it doesn't count my like travel to Dover, but it encompasses the time that I took to research, do pre-interviews, interviews, reporting in Dover, writing. I think that if you want to start a podcast, writing is important, even if you're just writing an intro. Yeah, so it really does take a long time. So if you're a funder out there and you're wondering why the producer fees are so high and the hours are listed at 100 hours or 80 hours or whatever, it's because it really does take that long to produce a podcast.
Your podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so amazed by that. Really. I'm so amazed by that. Because like you do all that work and then the work starts. You know, I mean, you do the interviews, which are hard and can be emotional, like with your family. I mean, that is draining. And you get through that, then you got to the real work starts. You know, you got to start writing and editing and figuring out the story. And I'm really in awe of it. I really am. I think it's so great.
Thank you.
And then I don't know, you're humble, so you may not answer this, but talk about all the different recognitions you've gotten. Because I feel like we're connected on various social networks, and I'm on your awesome email. And every time there are all these crazy recognitions you're getting from all over the place. And none of it comes off as bragging at all. It's just like, hey, these people like what I'm doing. This is, these folks, I got this recognition. And I think it's awesome. Name off some of the folks that have recognized you, if you will. If you don't, I'll edit it in. I'm gonna go read them off and edit it in myself.
Well, at the beginning of every year, I force myself to sit down and look at my accomplishments, just because I try not to dwell in that throughout the year. But it is nice to reflect back on what I did and also what I learned. But last year, I was awarded the inaugural Public Humanities Fellowship from Humanities Washington, which was a really cool opportunity. It included an award, and that helped fund part of the beginning of the third season. And then I also got to meet with Humanities Washington staff for a couple of months. I guess my podcast is also shared on Butte America Radio, Gallatin Valley Community Radio, and Missoula Community Access Television. And I've received awards from Humanities Montana and Headwaters Foundation and Montana Farmers Union. And I've loved the opportunity to work with the Red Ants Pants Music Festival and the Red Ants Pants Foundation's Girls Leadership Program. So that's, I guess, another place where my work has been recognized, along with MSU Extension.
It's so cool. And I mean, you got to think about it. It's like, this did not exist. There was nothing. And out of nothing, you created this. And now all these people are giving you awards, and it's your job. I mean, can you believe it? How awesome that is?
Yeah, I think if you would have told me that this would be my job 5 or 10 years ago, and that I'd be telling stories about agricultural communities, I don't know if I would have believed you. But then again, I have worked really hard the last few years, and so I'm really stoked that it has come together. I hope that's okay to say. I hope that's not bragging, but
no, it's not bragging at all. It's just the truth, and that's the only way that you would have been able to accomplish all this is working hard and doing something that you're passionate about. And it's kind of like a circular thing, because you can't do one without the other.
Yeah.
In order to work as hard as you do, you have to be kind of obsessed with it, and then the harder you work, the more obsessed you get. And it's this weird circular thing that when you do it like you do it, it ends up working out really awesome. But really, I mean, I think that's such a cool thing to think about, is that this thing was your idea. You had the guts to do it. You put in the work and you put it out in the world. It would not exist without you. It's completely your idea. And now it's all over the place, and people love it, and it's making their lives better. So
yeah, I'm really glad I didn't take that communications director job that I was thinking about in February of 2020, and I followed this little voice inside of me that said, just go for it. What do you have to lose? You could get a job if it doesn't work out, but you might as well try.
I love it. So cool. So I do want to get book recommendations from you, because I think our interest in books might be pretty similar, kind of similar, but I know you've got a lot that I have not read and probably should read. So what are some important books to you?
Okay, I have this written out so I can share
Perfect.
all the books. Heartland, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth by Sarah Smarsh. I read her book in grad school, and it's so cool to read a book written by a rural person about experiences that I can resonate with. I think for so much of my childhood, I was reading books or watching movies that were centered on urban experiences. And in the last few years, that hasn't been the case. I've been diving into books that talk about rural and agricultural communities, which is really awesome. And Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
I still haven't read that. It's unacceptable.
I need to reread it. It's so good. I read it when I lived in Asheville and was just about to move to Seattle, and I really, really enjoyed that book. Right now, I'm reading The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture by Gabor Mate.
I've seen interviews with him, but I've never read anything by him.
Yeah, it's a thick book, but I'm cruising through it. It's really interesting to look at how, addiction, for instance, how just society at large kind of breeds illness and how we can heal together. It's a great book. And The Last Best Place, a Montana anthology, co-edited by William Kittredge, is a great book if you want to like learn about Montana. Recently, I've been kind of reading like the creation stories about the Assiniboine, and there's just a really big diversity of stories in that book. The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't read any of these books.
Cool.
This is great. No, this is great.
Yeah, he's British and he has sheep and is really inspiring.
I think somebody, how new is that book?
He has a more recent book called English Pastoral, so it might be 10 years old or so.
I feel like I get all these publicists like wanting to send me books, and I feel like there was a book like that, but I have not read it. No, all right, it's on the list.
Oh, cool. Dakota, A Spiritual Geography by Kathleen Norris is a book that I read in grad school too, and it really helped me understand my home community and where I went to school, Medicine Lake, and like talks about towns that are about 100 years old and how we kind of, she talks about the local history mentality where we prefer the mythologies of the past to what's going on in the present, and how kind of small town populations have been shrinking in the Dakotas and eastern Montana. So that's a really great book to make sense of the eastern Montana, Dakota area. And then I take classes from the Hugo House, writing classes every so often. And I took a class from Joe Wilkins, who's also from rural Montana. And he's just awesome. And he sent me a couple of his books, and I love his books of poetry, Thieve and Killing the Mourning Dogs, or Murnian Dogs. Yeah, so I recommend checking out Joe Wilkins' work.
I've heard he's like one of the coolest dudes around.
Yeah, he seems so neat. He invited me to speak to his class. He's teaching like a rural literature and pop culture class or something. And I just wanted to hang out with him and the class like all day. They were really, really cool.
So many people mention him, and it just comes up time and again. And I think it seems that he keeps pretty, kind of a low profile, but so many people that I respect have great respect for him. So
you should sign up for one of his writing classes. They're really good.
I need it.
Yeah. And you can do them virtually through Seattle's Hugo House.
Okay, cool. We'll have links to that too for people listening.
Yeah. Awesome. And then a couple like podcast writing books, because we've been talking about like how to start a podcast. I really like Becoming Wise by Krista Tippett, and she includes snippets from her interviews. And then when I took that podcast class in grad school, we read different chapters from Sound Reporting by NPR, which gives you like pretty technical advice about how to go out and report and interview people. And then Out on the Wire, which is a graphic novel that talks about narrative podcasts. It has Jessica Abel and Ira Glass. And then for writing books, I like On Writing Well by William Zinsser.
I do have that one. I have read that one.
Oh,
that's
cool.
a good one. Very good.
That is a good one. That's one I read when I was living in Germany and was taking the writing class remotely. And then Writing Tools by Roy Peter Clark.
I don't have that one. And I'll throw in, there's a good one about writing by Stephen King. I think it's called On Writing. And like the first half is kind of a brief memoir of his personal life and writing journey. And then the second half is his tips on writing. And it kind of reminded me of On Writing Well. I love those kind of books. Yeah.
And I read a lot of nonfiction, but recently I've been trying to read for fun or like listen to audiobooks. So sometimes I listen to Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology when I'm doing my long car rides from around Montana. And I listened to The Sentence by Louise Erdrich recently on a long car ride, and that was really good, especially if you want to make sense of all that happened during the George Floyd protests in 2020. And she's an amazing writer.
Have you read The Overstory?
I haven't.
Me neither. And everybody, it's kind of like Braiding Sweetgrass in that now it's just crossed over to, it's ridiculous that I haven't read it because it continues to come up. So, but I'm like you, I read mostly nonfiction. No, those are awesome. And we'll have links to all those. And I need to dig into that list because a lot of those are new to me. So thank you for having those ready to go. And then last question, just any parting words of wisdom or something you'd like to leave the listeners with? I feel like you're a lot better at all this stuff than I am, but there's so much overlap between what we're doing. And I think there's a lot of overlap between the folks that listen to Mountain and Prairie and everything you're doing. So any final words of wisdom? You've already been throwing out a lot.
I guess I'll repeat, to whom much is given, much is expected. If you're ever faced with the decision to follow the money or follow your passion, I think you should follow your passion and the money will come. Yeah, I don't think any experience is tangential. I used to look at my resume and be like, oh, this is such a random smattering of jobs. But really everything that I've done has contributed to where I am today. And maybe don't fear responsibility, because it also comes with a lot of gifts.
I love all that. That's really, really... How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm turning 32 February 20th.
Man, you're very wise. I wish I'd had my act together when I was 32.
Oh, thank you. Well, if you were talking to 24-year-old Megan, you would not be saying that.
Well, no, I'm so glad I got to ask you all these questions, because I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last, year and a half, or however long it's been. But I've just been so curious about certain things. And so I just really appreciate you being so patient with all my crazy questions. But I really love everything you do. I can't wait to see where it goes and how it progresses and all the different directions that you take it in the coming years. It's very inspiring. Keep up the great work. And I'll look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Ed. I look forward to meeting you in person someday, hopefully soon.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.